Hey everyone, this is Christine from Left Side Art. Today I am going to show you two sample packages from Dylusions and Dina Wakley's media. These packages are nice if you're just getting into their products, and if not, you can just learn some new techniques with a little instruction booklet that they give you in each of these. So I found these at Michael's. They were about $25 and I had 50% off and 40% off coupons at two different times, so they weren't too bad. First I'm going to open up this Dylusions one, and it comes with a mini jar of paint rather than the little bit larger ones that are sold individually. It's black, and then a distress blender. It's a mini distress blender, I believe by Tim Holtz, or maybe it's just by the regular Ranger line in general. This little booklet, which is pretty nice because it literally takes you step by step on what to do. It also comes in multiple languages. It comes with a stencil and also a mask. And then it came with 5 pieces of mixed media cardstock. Going through both of these kits took me a total of, I think, about an hour, and that was it. So 2 quick little sets of projects, and they were pretty fun to do. If you don't end up using all this mixed media cardstock, you can definitely use it for other things. It's pretty thick and it held up to the ink pretty well. And then also in this package are 3 Dylusion ink sprays and a mini mister. A mini mister is just like a really small sprayer for water, or I suppose you could put ink in it too, but in this case it was used with water. This purple is called Crushed Grape. The greenish blue is Vibrant Turquoise. The font's a little strange on the bottle, so if I got that wrong, I'm sorry. And then the pink is Bubblegum Pink. I've used each of these colors before and they're pretty fun to use, so I was pretty excited to have 3 more little bottles of it. The first example we're going to go through is called inking, and the first step is to apply ink to the entire piece of cardstock. In this case I used all 3 colors and then applied another piece of cardstock on top of it, pressed it down, lifted it up. Then you take a paper towel roll and you roll it over the cardstocks. I was also trying to pick up the rest of this ink just to cover up some of those plain pieces. And then you allow it to dry. Or you could dry it with the heat tool. The paper ended up warping in the end a little bit, but it held up pretty well. Okay, this next set of examples is called Ghosting, and you lay down the stencil, you spritz it with some water, flip it over, apply it to the other cardstock, and then with a paper towel roll it on top. I ended up rolling it quite a bit. I don't think my paper towel was quite as absorbent as it probably should be. I already had some stuff on it. This next step is called stenciling, where you apply the ink spray through the stencil and repeat some of the similar steps of flipping the stencil over to the other side and rolling your paper roll on top of it. Let it dry, or dry it with the heat tool. The paper started warping up a little bit, and if I was going to apply much more in this, I would have taped it down. And this last example is called masking. This is where we get to lay down our heart and use the mini distress blending tool around the heart. You can see at first I wasn't too sure how I wanted to get this out of the little pot, but I just dumped some of it out with a palette knife and then went from there. Mine didn't come out as neat as the little booklet has it, especially the edges around the heart. I guess I could have wiped off the mask as I went. You can see it's getting pretty messy at this point. It was all over my fingers, but that's okay. But you can see how interesting the background gets, especially through the hearts with all those other techniques we did first. I had a little bit of trouble wiping up this black paint. I don't think it wiped up as easily as my other paints that I use, either just plain craft paint or Liquitex Basics. I do not know if this paint is archival or not, but you know, I think it's advertised to be used in art journals, so it won't get a lot of UV rays there. And that's basically what archival means. It also has to do with light fastness and things like that. If you're going to be hanging anything on a wall, you might want to use better quality paint, but for art journaling and such, this is just fine. And I went a little off the rails here from the book. I just started doing my own thing where I wanted to see how this would look applying this paint straight through the stencil. And then I darkened the edges up a bit, which is what I usually like to do on any of my pieces, just to have a little bit of a border. This distress tool was nice to apply the paint through the stencil as well. It didn't seem to let the paint seep underneath the stencil, which is key. With the rest of the pieces of cardstock they provided, I just went in and just played a little bit. I tried doing what I think I would normally have done without really having a lot of these instructions, but I also was using the paper towel roll a bit, which is not usually part of the technique that I use. It did come in handy though. It's definitely something I'm going to be doing in the future. And so I just kept playing, kept laying ink down, and I also used this heart mask again, trying to flip it over with ink already on it, which I think turned out pretty well. I ended up getting this really nice color combo, and these three colors go pretty well together to begin with. You can't really mess it up too much. And this paint is already pretty watered down that I think if you wanted to add splashes with it, it wouldn't be a problem. I really don't think you needed to add more water to it. The next box with the Dina Wakley materials, they accidentally gave me 2 stencils, the exact same one, so that was fun to find out. And then a paintbrush, 3 colors in white gesso, and mixed media canvas boards. Now the first example I went through was Gesso Resist. I accidentally skipped the first example they have in the booklet, which is reduction stenciling, but we kind of do a little bit of that through these next couple examples anyway. And what you did was add gesso through the stencil with a paintbrush. You can't see it because it's white on white, but then I dry it and you'll be able to see where the stenciling is here in a minute. I found it hard to do this because I'm not used to applying gesso with a paintbrush through a stencil. I don't think I put enough on. I don't think I let it get thick enough, because by the time I added this watered down paint, which the instructions did say to water it down, on top of here, the gesso was supposed to act as a resist. And you can kind of see it through there, but I didn't like, it wasn't light enough. I don't think it was as pale as what the instructions had, so I used a paper towel and blotted some of it up. Now this next one, next sample I was going through is called stencil printing, and I kind of screwed up the instructions. They wanted you to coat the entire background in gesso first, let it dry, and then apply gesso through the stencil. So I kind of cleaned that up really quickly, laid down the stencil after the background dried, and then added it through in various places. Not completely uniform like the first time, just add gesso sporadically throughout the stencil. And after that dries, I took some watered down turquoise paint and applied it going down the canvas board. Water down this turquoise, apply it with the paintbrush on top of the canvas, and you can still see a little bit of the gesso showing through. This next step, I was supposed to add paint to the stencil and then put it onto my mixed media board. I was having a hard time doing this. It was just easier for me just to apply paint through the stencil like the first step. I don't know if I just wasn't adding enough to the stencil, or I just wasn't really getting it, but I was having problems. So again, I kind of went off the rails here and started doing my own thing, kept layering and layering until I had something interesting going on in this background. I don't know, maybe the point was to add enough paint to the stencil that you could then apply it straight to your mixed media board and get it to stick, but I just couldn't get that well of an impression. I possibly was not doing this correctly. Like anything else, you need to practice sometimes to get things going right. And this is where I started adding some of the gesso through the stencil with a paintbrush. And for this next board, I just kind of did my own thing. That was it of the instructions. And so I just kind of played around. I adjusted to the background and then just added some paint here and there and had some fun with it. These boards were nice. They didn't curl up whatsoever because it is a heavy board. It's like a piece of a canvas. So it was, you know, different from the dilution set. And here I'm adding some water through a stencil and then lifting it back up with a with a paper towel. Adding some of the turquoise to the stencil. I should definitely probably have let this dry a little bit longer, but you know, it's being impatient. And then with these little bottles, they have this nice little tip on them where you often see people applying little dots to them. So I just wanted to try that out and see how that would go. Now with this gesso, I wanted to see how watered down it was to add some splatters to the background with my Distress bristle brush here. But it's, you know, for experimental purposes. That's what this whole exercise is about. So I just want to keep testing different techniques to see what would work and what wouldn't work. And those are my 3 boards. Hope you've enjoyed this. Definitely pick up these 2 sample sets if you want to give this a try. It definitely introduces you to the product and to some of the techniques. I'll have links in the description below to some of the products by both Dina Wakley and Diane Reevely. I'll catch you next time. Thanks. Bye.